I am honored to be here today with Jimmy Rex. Jimmy is the founder of We Are the They. I'll let Jimmy go into the details, but Jimmy has a group that promotes healthy masculinity. You know, we live in a world where masculinity, it's an interesting topic, that's for sure. Jimmy has dedicated his life to promoting healthy masculinity. With that said, he's also a highly successful business owner, is a very successful real estate agent, and we are just super excited to have him here today. So with that, Jimmy, do you want to tell us your origin story? Tell us how it all began.
Sure, man. I appreciate you having me on, Reid. It's so fun having you in the group. And it's very rare I come across a human that I have a hard time keeping up with. And you are certainly one of those guys. So it's been fun to just be able to lean on you a little bit too, as being a member of this group. And that's the thing that when I launched it, I wanted was to attract people like you, people that were already hugely successful in life. And they just wanted to add to their own communities. So anyway, but yeah, man, I started this program 3 years ago. Before that, it's funny, when I was a kid, I always wanted to just have a cool life. I always wanted to have money when I was younger. I didn't want to.
I think you have definitely succeeded in that metric by every single possible measure, by the way.
I was like, my worst thing as a kid, I just hated being bored. I just didn't want to be a boring human. I wanted to be somebody that, like, in my young years, I got to go explore and visit the planet and go to all these amazing events and sports and things like that. And so I kind of chose a route that I could kind of do that. I didn't want to go the military route. I didn't want to go the lawyer, doctor route just because it was going to take too much time. And so I got into sales when I was 21 years old. And it was interesting. My first day, I knew I could sell, but you don't really know until you get out there. And I know when you're younger, you're like, okay, I want to have a good life. I want to have money when I'm older. But you don't really know if you're going to. You don't know how that's going to look. I didn't have a family that I could just count on that being the route that I win, or nobody really given me that direction or whatever. And so I remember I answered an ad in the paper to sell steak and chicken door to door when I was 21 years old. And the dude explained how much we could make and everything. And I went out my first day, Reid, and in about an hour and 15 minutes, I made almost $300. And it just blew the doors open of the possibilities of what my life could be. This was 22 years ago, right? And so all of a sudden I knew that my worst case in life, I was going to make six figures selling steak and chicken door to door. And it really opened up in my mind the possibility of what I could do. And so I ended up running that company for a couple of years. I franchised it. I brought in a partner. I didn't know what I was doing with business though. I forgot to collect sales tax one year. There went my whole profit. And it's a mess trying to do entrepreneurship without schooling.
States get really mean about sales tax when you mess that one up. There's pretty much zero latitude whatsoever.
Yeah. And then it's true, man. And then I had a partner steal a bunch of money from me and we franchised it. And then he disappeared and I had to take on all this debt. And long story short, I was 23, 24 years old and I had about $150,000 of debt, $125,000 debt. And it felt like my life was over. I was like, I don't know what to do here.
Wait, you had $125,000 of debt?
Yeah, because I had franchised this company. I'd gone big. I'd got a warehouse. We wrapped all these trucks I bought. We had 13 employees. And again, I just was super aggressive, not knowing what I did, but my partner was on drugs. And I was this Mormon kid. I didn't know what drugs were. I didn't know one person. I'd never seen a drug in my life.
And you still don't know what drugs are, obviously, right?
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. It depends on if we're talking about psychedelics or not. But no, I was naive. And he ended up we actually franchised a location in St. George. And the guy wrote him a $30,000 check. He cashed it. And he disappeared for 2 weeks, my partner. He was this big 6'5" dude from the Netherlands. His name was Herman. And I loved hanging out with him. He was so entertaining. He was the best salesperson I've ever seen in my life. But he was just, he's on drugs. And he disappeared for 2 weeks. And when he came back, the money was gone. He had gone on a binge with a buddy and they just wasted it all. And with tears streaming down my face, I just told him, man, I was like, I can't do this. You're out. I'm going to sell this company. I'm going to go do real estate. And thankfully, a few months earlier, I'd gotten my real estate license and I hadn't really done much with it, but I knew I could do something if I really applied myself. And so I got stuck. I had to call the people we owed money to because we were getting the meat on consignment. I took bank loans out for these trucks and for the big walk-in freezer and all the things we were buying. And I was all in my name because he was from Amsterdam. He's from the Netherlands. And so he couldn't put anything in his own name. And yeah, I got stuck with over $120,000 debt. And so I remember I put a poster board behind my door, my closet door, so nobody would ever see it. And it just said everyone I owed money to and how much. And I got into real estate, and Reid, it was the gift of my life, because when I got into real estate, I was so hungry to get rid of that debt. I was so intent that I was going to like eliminate that albatross hanging over me that I just went all in. I mean, I was working 80 hours a week, and I was falling asleep in my suit and waking up the next morning, jumping right back into it. My first full year as a realtor, I sold over 60 houses. Year 2, I sold 98 houses with one assistant, and I was named one of the 2 finalists for Salesperson of the Year on the Salt Lake Board of Realtors, and got it all paid off, and then the real estate market collapsed right when that happened. And so I got stuck with some more bad debt with houses I shouldn't have bought. It was a mess.
I just think it speaks so much to your character, though, that you had a debt, right? And you owed people money. And as opposed to just writing that off or declaring bankruptcy, you stepped up and you actually made good on that. And it's so rare to see people like that in this world. So that's fantastic. By the way, I once dated a girl who was from the Netherlands, and she said she was 5'11" and a half. She was really 6 feet, FYI. But she always loved to remind me that Dutch people are the tallest people in the world. So, and it seems like that aligns with your story as well. I also believe that you haven't made it in life until somebody has stolen something from you. So you clearly made it at a really early stage in life, because you were stolen from, it sounds like 22 years ago. So
yeah, well, and it was interesting because I just had the mindset of like, well, I borrowed the money, I guess I owe it. It was, it was never a question of whether I was going to pay it back. And I knew I could make money by that point. And so I jumped into real estate. But I mean, the crazy part was I was getting really aggressive buying real estate too. And then the market was going to collapse. And my mentor told me, sell everything. And I got rid of all the houses but 2. And those 2, I ended up having to take a loan on those. But I had to sell them for less than was owed. And normally you could short sell, but the bank knew I made a lot of money, so they didn't let me short sell. So I had to keep the loan. So I had, right when I got the 120 grand paid off, I swear to God, this is a true story, I had 150 grand debt from these 2 houses. Thankfully, I'd gotten in and started flipping homes, and we bought these 2 killer deals. I mean, I bought a house in Utah for $11,000. We flipped for 120. And, it was the wildest time in 2009, 10. And it took me less than like 4 months to pay off the debt the second time. But from there, I just went all in on real estate. And I had, I've been doing real estate now for almost 20 years. And I had some amazing years there. My best year I ever had, my last full year as a realtor, I sold 497 houses, me and a couple of agents on my team. And I invested a lot. So I own over 50 doors now, and just did a lot of things. And so what happened with me, Reid, how I got into We Are the They, is about 6 years ago, I sold the most expensive home ever in the state of Utah.
How expensive?
It was $32.5 million, which in Utah is like, it was basically a pair of mountains with a house on it, right?
Right.
All this other stuff. And when that happened, I made a 7-figure commission basically in a couple hours. And it just hit me as like, about that same time, there was a realtor that worked a lot the same way I did, and he got shot and killed collecting rent at a fourplex he owned here in Salt Lake. And every story in the news, it was the number one story for a couple of days, but it was just like realtor shot, realtor killed, realtor this. And I remember thinking to myself, like, if I die tomorrow and the only thing I'm known as is a realtor, like, that's a good life, but like, I feel like I missed something, and so I started diving into like, hey, what is my highest and best good? Like, where could I truly make an impact on this world? And it took me about 2 years working on it. I worked on it all the time, just taking notes. And I had some really terrible ideas that originally, but I'd also started building my Instagram. I'd launched my podcast. I've been going for 8 years now. I've got almost 650 episodes. And so I had a lot of people reaching out to me, and I started paying attention. This is, I think, a really pivotal thing, Reid, is I just said, what are people asking me for? Like, what are people coming to me for? And it was the same 2 things kept happening. Number one was like, Jimmy, I feel like you're really living your life. I feel like I'm stuck, but you're a guy that's really going for it in life. I've been to 114 countries, Reid. I've swam with tiger sharks and ran with the bulls and climbed with gorillas in Uganda, you name it, right? I've done all these things. But also I had an amazing group of friends. And that was the number one question I kept getting asked is, where do I find a group of friends like you have? And I truly have some of the best friends in the world right now today. And we're together every day. Like we do. I have so many amazing guys that I've been able to, connect with. And I started thinking to myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the thing that I can do the best in the world is I know how to help men connect on a deep level. And all my friends groups, they'd all met through me, through these different things that I did. And I realized that like all this time and effort that I had put into becoming the best version of myself. I mean, I've been every conference, every seminar, every mastermind, right? Every class, read 500 books on self-development. And I said, what if I just took the best of everything I learned and I took these different little things that I learned on how to help men connect, and I formed a men's program, a men's group. So I launched We Are the They about 3.5 years ago. And now I've coached over 500 men, yourself being one of them. And it's been the gift of my life. It's my favorite thing I've ever done. We do the most amazing things together. And it's truly, I turned over my real estate team to my partner. All my investments are managed by an assistant. And I really give everything now to just building my own personal brand and building this group, which is called We Are the They.
And it's amazing because you've aligned building your personal brand, you've aligned your life towards something that I just think 21st century America needs. And that is to understand what healthy masculinity is. And I think the best way to understand that is to lead it by example. And Jimmy, in the time I've gotten to know you, you 100% lead that by example. And one thing which you hit on earlier too is you talked about franchising, right? And a lot of people that I work with and that I interact in my space always ask me about franchising. And they always talk about, oh, I want to buy like this up and coming franchise because, you know, it's like so much growth opportunities and so much upside to it. And I always try to tell people that, you know, there's a risk if you go with franchises that aren't that established versus the real established ones, because it's, you know, higher upside. But with that said, you have more uncertainty around the systems and the processes and the people. And your story is certainly an interesting example of that. But you've done so much from a business standpoint. You've done so much on a personal standpoint. What I'm curious about is in all of those endeavors, whether it was selling chicken and steak, doing door to door, what's the biggest challenge you've had to overcome, Jimmy?
You know, those ones I just gave you were pretty big. When the real estate market collapsed in 2007, 2008, the hard part was I had made some pretty good money. It's interesting, Reid. Like, it's one thing to be broke. It's another thing to be broke when everyone thinks you're the friend with the most money, right? But all my investments were in real estate.
Yeah.
I invested in our real estate brokerage. I invested in real estate properties. I invested in my real estate team. And all my income came from real estate. And so when real estate basically completely bottomed out, it was like all my sources of income were gone. And I mean, 1 year in 2008, to give you an idea, I worked probably twice as hard as I did in '07. I sold half as many homes. I had at some point, I had 50 or 60 listings at a time and maybe would sell one every 2 weeks. And I mean, it was brutal. And you're watching people divorce across from you, bad decisions they'd made in their, you know, real estate and financial lives. And it was really taxing. I mean, you have to, there's no immediate reward. So like one of the best parts about business is you make a sale, you help somebody, you get this dopamine spike, right? Like you're doing something, you're providing impact and value. And with that, it was like, geez, it was like I was lucky if I was paying off bills and paying down my debt and paying, you know, taxes.
But at this point, people thought that you were like very successful. So people thought you were like multimillionaire crushing it. So how did you manage that dynamic with them?
Yeah, no, it was tricky. I mean, look, I learned ways. Well, if I could do it over again, I would just be vulnerable and I would talk about it and be honest, right? I was still wearing my mask. I hadn't learned the things that I teach in the program now. And so I had this mask on that was like, I'm fine. Everything's good. I'm still the number one agent in, you know, the county, all these different things. And so I just was putting up the best face that I could, which put a lot of pressure on me, right? And it's a miracle I didn't snap. Thankfully, I was really good at selling real estate. And so it didn't take me that long to like get out of that hole. But it was a lot of pressure. It was really hard. And I had one or two close friends.
Let me drill down on this, because this is something that I find fascinating, is that you had the mask, right? Which when you say that, I hear you had like a sense of pride, right? You had like pride. You had to uphold this image. And I wonder, did the need to uphold that image, sounds like that drove you. Do you think that being vulnerable and saying that you were struggling, do you actually, and there's no counterfactual, we can't go back and relive history, right? But do you think it would have played out differently if you'd actually taken that route?
Yeah, so I'll say two parts of that. Your immediate answer is probably yes. The first part of that is that mask that I was wearing absolutely motivated me. I was so driven because of it. I thought my biggest fear used to be people will say that guy used to be somebody. That was my biggest fear, like being a has-been, right? And then my second biggest fear is a fear we all have, is like that you're just not good enough. And I'd had an experience when I was a kid where my dad wanted me to get held back into the 8th grade to be a better baseball player. And some other people in our community had done that and, was like the MVP of the state. And he put a lot of pressure on me to do it because I wasn't that good at baseball. I was like, fine. I ended up, being a starter on my high school team, but that's about it. And I remember he put a lot of pressure on me to do it. And when I said I didn't want to do it as a 14-year-old, that's the last year you can do it. He looked me in the eyes and he said, and he was just trying to help me, but he said, okay, well, just so you know, you're not good enough. You'll never play baseball again. And all I heard was, you're not good enough. And so I actually wrote that on my hat, Reid. So I think I can answer your question because of this experience. So I wrote on my hat, you're not good enough. And I wore that for 3 years in high school to motivate me to prove my dad wrong.
So when you're wearing this "I'm not good enough" hat, because high school can be a brutal place, tell me how that played out. Like, what were people doing to you? What were they saying to you? Like, how did that affect you?
It was just internal, right? It was on the bottom of my hat.
Oh,
like
interesting. Yeah. Okay.
But
I took it literally.
I was looking at it every single day, and knowing now as an adult the power of words, the power of affirmations, the things we say to ourselves, like. So it was actually the first time, I think I'm oversharing here, but the first time I ever did mushrooms in a sacred setting, I saw that hat. It was 6 years ago. And I hadn't thought about my hat in years and years. When I saw it and it said, you're not good enough, I literally was like, oh my gosh, what did I do to myself? And this is why I was always trying to prove myself. I had to be the number one agent. I had to be going out with the hottest girl. I had to be successful. I had to be rich, all these different things. I had to be the funnest guy or funny or whatever. And when I saw that hat, I had this like message come to me that said, Jimmy, this has served you, but it no longer does. It's time to let it go. And I was like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful thing. So here's to answer your question. It's kind of interesting. Once I was able to release that, I no longer was coming from this place of not being good enough, or if I didn't do this, I wouldn't be lovable. Like, I really learned to start loving myself over the next couple of years, part of my journey. And what was funny is it did get harder to work. It got harder to grind and make those sales because I no longer was coming from this place of like, if you don't do this, nobody's going to love you. And so what I had to do, and this was the gift of we are the they coming in where it did, because it took me a couple of years from there to kind of try to, work through this stuff. And then it was like, wait, what if I could work out of love instead of fear? And so now what motivates me, instead of a fear of not being lovable or not being good enough, the reason I work is because I really love what I do. I literally feel like I'm in my dream job. I get to help people all day long and the rewards just come in left and right. I mean, I literally had 4 or 5 messages today from either a member or his wife or somebody about how this is helping them. I got to speak to 50 guys last night up at a cabin and, I had signed 20 of my books for them. These dudes brought my book with them to sign and get a picture with me. And it's like, it's the coolest thing to like, because when people come up to you, it's not like, dude, that movie you were in was amazing. It's like, hey man, I read your book and it changed my mind about this, or I learned to love myself, or I quit looking at porn because of that video you made on YouTube. And hey, my son quit, smoking weed because of that post you made about this, or whatever it might have been. And so it's like such a rewarding thing. And it really becomes a whole different shift of how you work. But even today, I don't work nearly as hard as I did when I was in that grind. And thank God I don't have to, right? And I don't want to. But there's no, like if I took a day off for 10 years until I had that experience, I had pure guilt. I couldn't even enjoy the day off. I just felt like I should have been working. And so it's really a whole evolution. But yeah, I think that just because I did kind of have that experience with letting go of that feeling of not being good enough, I also think, had I not had that mask on when I first started working, I probably would have never developed into who I am.
Yeah, it's part of the journey. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about the impact that helping people has on you, and not to the level that you've experienced it, but I've got to taste that a couple times in life, mainly through teaching. And it is what life is all about. All the money that I've made in the world, I would trade that in a second for just even being able to marginally improve someone's life by something that I've individually done. So it's great to hear you talk about that. All right, so you've been successful in business, right? You invest a lot in your relationships. You're doing we are the they now. It seems like, on the outside, you got life together, right? Let's talk about what's one thing that scares you right now. What's one thing that you don't have figured out that you're really working on?
The thing I'm working on the hardest, have been for a year and a half, is my own personal relationship with like romantic relationship.
You and me both, baby. You and me both.
Yeah. It's interesting. I went to I went to his platinum member only event for couples last October. And I wanted to go. I've been, ever since May of coming up on 2 years, I've just really dove into relationships of what like why I haven't been better at them, frankly. Like I've dated a ton. I've been on over 1,000 first dates. I've had plenty of girlfriends, but I've never been able to pick one. And there was a couple big things that happened for me over the last year that have really helped me. One of which was going to that event. I understood that, like, I always thought, and this is going to sound so stupid, Reid, but this was my honest to God thought till a year and a half ago was,
no thought ever sounds stupid. No question's ever a bad question. Keeping it
fair.
internal is a bad decision, but let it all out there.
Fair enough. I literally thought that you find the person that you just match up perfectly with and you don't fight with. I literally thought that's how it eventually happened. So I just kept dating to find that person. And anytime we got in a fight, I just broke up. I remember I dated a girl like 5 years ago and we got in one fight and I was like, well, I guess we're done. She's like, what are you talking about? We're not done. We're just in a fight. And it was like, that was the first time literally in my entire dating life that I got in a fight and we stayed in the relationship. But that was a big epiphany for me. And then I've been really working on like how to communicate in relationships, how the masculine and the feminine works. It's been really cool because I've been able to connect. I've hired my form of figuring stuff out is I find who I think is the best in the world at teaching it, and I go get in their world. So I've hired within the last 2 years, I hired Neil Strauss one-on-one. I hired Ed Milet one-on-one. I hired Stefanos Safondos one-on-one. I've joined a couple other little masterminds, worked with these different people, and I study books all day. I mean, G.S. Youngblood is a guy that I love. I got his book about embodiment here on my desk. I've been reading. He's actually, I'm going to his mastermind here later this month for 4 days. Just all these different things. And I'm just trying to learn how to, because I think part of me, I just don't want to be in a bad relationship. And so I'm really trying to figure out all this stuff. And in the meanwhile, last year I had 2 girlfriends and, the one I really thought it was going to be game over with. And we're trying to figure that piece out. But but there's a lot that goes into those human behaviors. And, the people we date tend to be our best teachers. They tend to show us our shadows. They know how to trigger the thing out of us we think that we've worked on. And so I can vulnerably say, yeah, that's the piece I work on the most. It's such an important piece of life. And it's funny because stuff in work doesn't really trigger me anymore. Stuff with other people don't really bother me. But in that romantic relationship, I've got my wounds, I've got my scars. And when they get touched, man, I have to really count on all these things I'm working on to not implode.
100%. I mean, and listen, the Harvard Happiness Study has laid it out for the last 60 plus years, right? What is the biggest driver of happiness in life? What is it, Jimmy?
Self-love. I don't know.
Quality of relationships, right? Yeah. Quality of relationships. And the closer the person is to you, so mother, father, siblings, significant others, that is the biggest driver of happiness. So if you have tough interpersonal relationships, you're going to be unhappy. If you have great ones, you're going to be fulfilled. And it's the most important thing. It's a certainty. It's an academic certainty in life. No one will argue with that point. If they were easy, I think we'd all have great ones, right? But to the point that you've talked about in great detail, they're tough, they're messy, they're vulnerable, they're emotional, they're nonlinear to say the least.
Beautiful too, right? It's why we love golf. It's why we love poker. Is you can do everything right and still your ball just careens off, or the guy flops a straight on the inside straight draw. It's like life is going to just throw you these things, and that's what keeps us from being bored. And so it's cool. I've really embraced this journey that I'm on with this part of my life, and I'm enjoying it a lot. And it's not one where I'm just like, oh, I can't believe I haven't figured this out. It's like, what a beautiful thing to get to this point now. And now my desire is to really go all in on this thing where I've been able to experience everything else I have, and now I get to work on this. And so it's exciting for me.
Yeah, you said it best. It's I think the critical part, as I certainly struggle with too, is try to enjoy the journey, right? When the journey is being enjoyed, the end outcome doesn't ultimately matter. But at least for me, when I'm enjoying the journey, I tend to accomplish all the things that I want to as well. So the two are highly interrelated. And it's interesting too, talking about relationships, is that, what I don't like to talk about a lot is that I've had those same, I've had a lot of failures in my romantic relationships. But what I've found in life is that I've compensated for that by having some of the best relationships in the context of owning small businesses and people that have worked for me, and being able to invest a lot in them. Because I think that as a human being, we have a certain relationship fulfillment quota that we have to get somehow, some way. And I think it's just a question of figuring out where to get that. But I do also believe that there is no substitute for having that close resonant romantic relationship. As long as that exists, a gap is going to be there, independent of how much, high achievers like you and I try to compensate
A thousand
by doing
percent.
everything.
Tony Robbins says it best. He's like, a man's job, he's got basically two circles, and he's got a big one like this. That's his life's purpose. And then there's a smaller one that's his romantic relationship. And where you make a mistake is if you try to make that smaller circle fill the bigger one, which is your life's purpose. Because a lot of men lose themselves or their purpose for like a woman. But at the same time, if you don't have that circle, there is a gaping hole in your life, right? And so I think that you're completely right on that. And I will agree. I think for me, that's probably how I figured out how to be such a good friend. Like I always put my friends ahead of whoever I was dating in my 20s and 30s. And for better or worse, it helped me learn to be able to do what I do now for these men's groups. And I can look now and be like, oh, I was way off balance. I was like putting way too much emphasis on the friendships and not nearly enough on my romantic relationships. But that's all part of my path that allows me to do what I get to do now.
So let me ask you a question, going back to some business stuff. So how do you think you're able to achieve such autonomy and freedom in your business? And when you hear those terms, autonomy and freedom, what do they really mean to you?
I mean, autonomy and freedom. Autonomy is just, do you have your systems in place? Like the systems that need to be there, are they there? And I think we all are constantly trying to improve our systems. AI probably showed us that we can maybe automate a lot more.
AI, what's that, right? No one talks about that these days.
And then freedom is just I think it's like, do you wake up and you enjoy what you spend your time on? Like, are you doing the things every day that you want to be doing? So like for me, I truly don't do much I don't want to anymore. I get to speak, I make content, I coach, I do my events, and that's pretty much where 95% of my attention goes. And, there's maybe 4 or 5% of stuff I still don't like doing, but I've tried to automate all that with good employees. And, I've got 3 or 4 really good people around me that help me to stay organized, and I pay them well. I treat them well. And they also, I think your job as the leader of a group or a company is to help people see the vision of what it is. And one of my favorite things is when I get these really cool messages, I just send them to my important team members and they get to see them. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, this is so much bigger than just getting a paycheck. Like we're literally saving lives, helping people change, trajectory of their kids forever, like all these different things. And so it becomes a much bigger purpose than just a job. And, most of my guys that work for me, they work harder than I would even hope that I could get them to. And they want to be engaged in it at that level.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because what you do, it's mission driven. But unlike, I think some people in the world talk about the importance of purpose and talk about the importance of congruency and the importance of helping people and all that good stuff. I think that not all those people necessarily live that, but with you, I feel like it's genuine. And that's why I choose to associate with you and spend time with you, because it comes from your heart. And there's pain there. There's like some darkness there, but it's authentic and it's legitimate and it's real. And I think that I think that we need more of that in the country. So Jimmy, what do you wish people asked you more about? You got this men's group, you do cool things in the outdoors, you got these relationship ups and downs, but what do you wish people would ask you about?
What do I wish people would ask me about, man? It's funny. I feel like people, it's hard for me to answer that question, Reid, because my friends and I, we have such depth to our conversations. We really have gotten past the surface level stuff. And so we actually have those deep connecting conversations where we talk about all sorts of stuff. But I think it's asking the second and third level of questions, right? So like I have a couple of best buddies that just, we know each other, right? And a couple of months ago, I was just going through some stuff, and one of the buddies, my hacks in life. So all the guys that I coach, I got about 150 here locally that I coach. They can set up a one-on-one coaching walk with me any morning they want. So they actually they schedule it. They meet me at my door at 7 a.m. and we go for a walk for 40 minutes. And it's perfect because it helps me get up on time and get going and start my day with a walk, talking to a friend. It's amazing. And one of my buddies hit me up and he's like, he scheduled a walk. He's my best friend since I was 12. And we start walking. He goes, hey, man, I'm actually here for you today. I don't need the walk. What's going on? And and I give him the first levels of like, oh, you're good, and he's like, no, man. Like, and we start getting deeper into that conversation. And I started talking to him and I'm like, damn, yeah, I do need some things. And it was so good to just like get a few things off my chest, things that maybe I wasn't loving about myself at that time. And for him to hear it, to hold space for it, no judgment on it, and love me still. And I think that's the key to what I try to do with my program is I try to create a container where men can be seen. So whether it's a conversation I'm having with you or with a friend, what I want more of is like how to create safe containers, because in that you get inspired to want to change yourself. And so like in that space, I was able to feel that love and be seen completely. And I was just like, yeah, this is a dude that is just got me. And you never forget those experiences, because when you're loved in a completely vulnerable state, not needing to show up as your best self. I grew up in a religion that it's not okay not to be okay. And so you always are wearing that mask. And when you can put it down and you're still okay and you're still lovable, it's like, damn, I think I just got people that love me. So those are, without, answering the question of what more questions I would want, those are the kinds of conversations I want to be having all the time.
And it's interesting too, because they've done studies of leaders, and in particular, the context of very successful CEOs or business owners that have sold businesses. And what they find is that effective leaders think about other people in the business sales more than they think about themselves. And the general theme there is that oftentimes as a leader, you don't think about yourself as much as you potentially should. And to your point, having the people around you to actually ask, hey, Jimmy, you're always checking on me, but how are you doing, right? Because I think it's a behavior, it's not, I think the studies show it's a behavioral trait of leaders to oftentimes think about others more than themselves. And that's a good thing overall, in my humble opinion. However, there's a cost to it as well. So it's interesting to hear your insight on that.
Yeah, it's good to have people that, that you just know each other well enough too, that they're able to like bring that up. And they feel, one of my buddies, we were disagreeing about something on Twitter. I think it was honestly about a sporting event. But
what's Twitter? I don't know what Twitter is.
X.
I'm here to help Elon Musk promote his new brand.
That's good. So anyway, and it was really cool. And in fact, I'm going to read what he said back because it was so beautiful. But I was like, I was kind of nervous. I'm like, oh, I love this guy. Why am I fighting over something so stupid with him? And I don't fight on Twitter like this or X. I don't know how this got to this point, but he said, Jimmy, when you love and respect someone, you can safely express your feelings. And I just thought, God, that's so good. Like, what a beautiful conversation. That's like how a buddy responds to you, like, hey, you can have your opinion. You can have your shitty opinion, in my opinion, but I still love you and you're safe to share that with me. I'm not going to think less of you. This isn't going to change our relationship. And I think if we had more of those conversations always with everybody in our lives, how beautiful those relationships would be.
Yeah, absolutely. The ability to say what we think and do it without judgment, right? And that's, I think, a great litmus test for what a real friendship is and a real meaningful relationship is, all based on the principle of honesty and vulnerability. All right. We also we basically on this podcast talk to millionaires who do cool things in the outdoors. So let's shift to the outdoors. So what do you do in the outdoors that defines you?
Oh man, so I'll tell you kind of one of the things I started when I started coaching with Stefanos a couple of years ago. It was interesting. He said, Jimmy, God speaks to us through silence, solace, and solitude. He said, how often do you go sit in nature for like an hour at a time without your phone? I was in Scouts the last time I did it, And so I have really taken upon me to do that. And the last couple of years, I even went 2 days once by myself in nature. I rented a cabin, but I just went by myself left my phone at my house and just went up and just hung out in nature. And it's been really cool. I try to get up at least once a week. It's a little bit harder in the winter here in Utah, just because it's cold. I don't like it. But just getting into nature and letting God talk to you, letting your mind clear out. We have so much noise. And so my favorite thing to do with nature is just to be in it. It's just so beautiful, and putting the phone away and getting up there, and just a lot of times I'll just sit on a rock. And it's just like a meditation essentially. But I used to not be able to sit still for 7 minutes, man. I have high energy. But I've got to the point now where I can meditate every day for 20 minutes. I can sit in silence for an hour, 2 hours up in nature and just let that experience calm my nervous system and recenter me, ground me, all those things.
So what do you find actually happens after you do like a 2-day thing in nature, or you go up there for a day and get away? How do you feel after that? How do you come back to the world?
Very aware is the word that I'll use. Like, because when there's so much stimulus, so many things going on, we don't even realize, like, I think, but most of us check our phone. You start looking at how many minutes or hours a day you're on it. It's pretty shocking. Now for me, I used to always think I needed to have an audiobook in or a podcast, 1.5 speed, 2 speed, like just getting as much as I could. And the awareness that I had was like, I have so much noise that I'm not able to just be grounded in myself. And so, and you talk about being plugged into the matrix. Like when you go up into the cabin for 2 days without your phone, I can't tell how many times you go to reach for your phone because you feel disconnected from the world. It's really weird. And you just feel this complete disconnect. And that's not a healthy thing. And so I think what it brought to me was an awareness of how often am I actually present? How often am I distracted? How often am I fidgeting around versus really being in that present moment? And it's a battle for me. Like it is. I'm 100 times better than I used to be, but that's my biggest thing I work on now. And that was the best awareness I ever had was just, and by the way, how many things came to me when I just let my mind kind of go where it needed to go. I got answers to 15 different questions that I had. And so I think that was a big piece of it as well.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff, having that connection. And one thing, which I started doing a couple of years ago, which was life changing for me, is I stopped 100% following the news. And what I found happened is that I'd actually still know what was going on because people would tell me, but I was able to become much more present. And currently I check LinkedIn once a day and Facebook once a day. And that's the extent of my social media. And I only check it for like 30 seconds because doing that also allows me to just be more connected and closer. A lot of great things with social media. And I'm not saying that makes sense for everybody. However, it's just something that's allowed me to have that same level of connection or a similar level of connection that you're talking about there. So what's the most adventurous thing you've ever done in the outdoors? I know you've done some pretty adventurous stuff because I've been part of some of those adventures, luckily.
Yeah. I'm a sucker for adventure. Like I want to experience all of it. So I've swam in the middle of the ocean with no cage with tiger sharks.
Let me back up a second though. What does adventure mean to you? When you hear that word, right? What does it mean to Jimmy?
I think we have this entire world, this planet that we get to have. And I think one of the reasons why so many people forget the beauty of this planet or like the purpose of trying to save it is they're not experiencing it. So for me, it's like, what can I go experience that a normal person will maybe never be able to experience? To me, that's adventure, right? And so we do the jump, the rope swing with our group where we jump off a 400-foot cliff and we get caught by a rope that swings us across the valley. Another thing that I've done is, I swam with tiger sharks in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with no cage. I've climbed with the gorillas in Uganda. I've ran with the bulls in Spain. Like I said, I've been to 114 countries. And so I've climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. I know you're a climber and do some of these things. And all of these things, like these once in a lifetime opportunities or things that you can take every single time you travel and you go, it's the little things that happen along those adventures. It's the conversation with your buddy, or it's the random village person that you met and had that moment with. It's, that feeling of like just gratitude for your life and where you're at. Those are the parts that change you. And I think that's the whole reason you do adventure. It's like, you can't be the same person when you're, doing those things. I think if I can get you to jump off a 400-foot cliff, then I can get you to have a tough conversation with your daughter you've been avoiding, or maybe, with your wife or something, and something that, you need to clean up in your life or something like that. Just little things like that are going to make a big difference. But it's getting past that feeling, that fear. I think we just live in a world, Reid, where it's so easy to be comfortable. It's really easy to never be uncomfortable in 2025. And so you've got to, push yourself to put yourself in places. I know you do that more than anyone I know. You just got back from Aconcagua. But those are the things that I think at the end of your life, I had a really smart man. He's the #1 shark photographer in the world. And we were swimming with the hammerheads and the tiger sharks in the Atlantic Ocean. He said, Jimmy, at the end of your life, you're only going to remember the big moments. And he said, the more of those moments that you can create in your life, the more fulfilled and more long your life is going to feel to you as a human. And I always thought that was a beautiful concept. You can get that even with years, right? If you do a ton of cool things in a year, it feels like you had a big year. If not, it's like, where the hell did the year just go? And I think it's that way with our lives. And so I try to do as many things. I have this saying, Reid, I said, do as many things as you can that you'll remember when you're 80. That's, or that you'll remember on your deathbed. And like anytime I'm having one of those days, I'll be like, boys, this is a day you're going to remember when you're 80. And those are my favorite days to create.
Oh, those are so great. And the best part is that, I'll add on 2 things. One, you're in the business right now of creating those moments for yourself and creating them for others as well. And the best part is that the relationships that I've personally seen get developed among people doing those things, they are changing people's lives. And I think it's like great to do those things, alone or with people that you don't know. That can be fun. But if you do it in a container that already existed before, you use that event to strengthen the container, and then that same container exists afterwards. That is lightning in a bottle. It's what life is all about. It's like it's a 10.5 out of 10, quite frankly. So Jimmy, what's your next adventure? And I know you do some adventures, on your own, but what's some next adventure that people can join you on potentially, and how would they engage you around that?
Yeah, so I'm taking a group. We're going back to Rome with the Bulls in Spain in this summer. And so if that's a bucket list item for you, we have a couple spots still available. We're taking 50 guys. But it's more about the camaraderie. I did it 2 years ago and it's unbelievable. We go to Barcelona, and everything we do is VIP. We got to walk the path with the guy that did the documentary about the running of the bulls. We got to go to the ranch he's like the Tom Brady of bullfighting, and he gave us private lessons, and we all got to do it with the bulls, with the mini bulls.
Yeah.
We had the balcony spots, it's just this trip of a lifetime. I'm also taking a group next winter to New Zealand as an adventure trip. And then keep an eye out. If you go to our website, wattmovement.com, starting in this fall, I'm going to do these one-off mastermind events in different cities. So we have one in Vegas, we have one in Phoenix, we have one in Dallas, Orange County. Each month we're going to do a different city. And the goal is, to take 50 guys from your community, and we go through this event together, this exercise, and then you have a community local to you where you get to really depend upon these guys. You get to create this community with each other. And so I'm going to start doing that, again, starting this fall. We're going to take it all over the country and do different cities.
It's fantastic. Sign me up, and anyone that's such a great thing you're doing. Great, Jimmy. Well, we're coming to the end here, but is there anything else you want to mention? How can people best engage with you going forward?
Sure. Yeah. Everything that I do, I send out through my Instagram. So like I said, I've got 650 episodes on my podcast. I've had 3 books come out now. I have speaking gigs all the time. If you ever want to follow me, Mr. Jimmy Rex on Instagram is the best place to find me. And that's where I share all the different things that I'm doing. And so just reach out to me there, and I would love to connect with anybody that wants to.
Perfect. Jimmy, thank you so much for being on. Ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy is truly a man among men whose life purpose now is teaching healthy masculinity, which I just think we need so much now in 21st century America. So Jimmy, you continue to inspire me. So keep it up, my friend.
Dude, I appreciate you, Reid. Thank you so much for everything, my man.